Hi, my name is Jeff Thomas. I'm an attorney based in New Orleans, practicing environmental law. I have my own consulting practice now, Thomas Strategies, but previously had worked for the city of New Orleans in the recovery. And one of the things that I did then, and similar to now, is taking a look at the law as it's written on paper and trying to fit it to a disaster that is infinitely larger than what I think was intended when they created the law. And I think that's what you have here with NRDA, much like you did after Hurricane Katrina with its set of disaster recovery laws. You have a disaster that wasn't written for this NRDA playbook, and yet somehow you have to try to make it work. And I think working within that framework, the challenge for the advocacy community is always trying to stretch those boundaries as much as you can. I think the point earlier Chris made was to enhance, and yet reconcile that with this concept of a baseline that NRDA demands. And I think we yet still don't know if anything's going to come from the Mavis plan or the Clean Water Act violations, whether that money's going to be diverted. All of that is certainly things that are pressure points to be worked on, but what's right in front of us as a matter of law is NRDA. And so I think foremost, that's the responsibility of the advocacy community, to try to make that work. And there's always two flanks to that. And I think it's been spoken well to today about the litigation aspects and potentially trying to get a formal role for NGOs in that process. I would say here at the starting blocks, just as important is working the policy and political front. NRDA suffers from its own obscurity and terrible sounding acronym. It's not sexy. It's something that is probably the most important aspect of this post-oil spill disaster, and yet you unfailingly never see it with any detail or glamour in the newspaper. I've always looked at it as the claims process for the environment. And I think it's important to latch on to that, because so much is spoken to and attention given to the claims process that Feinberg-Rosen has set up for individuals. But as was the case in post-Katrina, you're going to see that so many aspects of the community that were devastated by the oil spill are not going to be addressed by that claims process, nor will they be addressed by a very formal, narrow view of NRDA. And so I think the responsibility here is to just really kind of atomize this whole process and take a look at where we could stretch it. I think it begins with getting that definition to be expanded to be an enhancement concept rather than just duplicate the day before the oil spill. And that's largely the prerogative of the trustees, and I would say start at home. In Louisiana, for example, where I'm from, the trustees have been set up and more or less will drive the momentum of NRDA in that state. The feds, I think, will take their cues politically from whatever noise Louisiana creates in that process. And so I think that it's really a moment in time now to get to the Coastal Restoration Authority as the lead trustee, and DNR and DEQ and all the others, and see what their thinking is. I don't know if you know this, but they've already put out Louisiana $6 billion in restoration projects under NRDA. That was something they presented to the other trustees about a month ago as emergency projects that could be put forward and implemented before the end of the process. That's a lot of money, and some of those projects arguably are needed. They're diversion projects, Mr. Go restoration, but they're already doing this, and moreover doing it on your behalf. So I think this is the time to really kind of get in there, maybe press pause and get a better sense of their thinking as they move forward. Certainly, one of the things I think we need to focus more on is this idea of compensatory restoration. The idea of NRDA is compensating not only for the damaged critters and the damaged natural resource, but your deprived use of it. You as a commercial fisherman, you as a hunter, you as a swimmer, you as a community that just had derived a public municipal benefit from this natural resource. You've been deprived of that from the moment the oil spill happened up until some moment that the trustees will declare as recovery. And so they try to quantify all that, put a dollar figure to it, go to BP and say, that's X amount of billions of dollars. Will you pay yes or no? Then you either get that money by litigation or by agreement. And then they come up with projects, the trustees, again on your behalf, that tries to neatly approximate that lost use. And that's where I think a cookbook for NRDA can really let you down. If you just look at the playbook as it's been written, for your garden variety smaller NRDAs, pretty unimaginative stuff in terms of what they do to compensate you for your deprived use. We're not enhancing anything. We're not creating a better baseline than that we had the day before the storm. If X amount of fishermen were deprived of X amount of hours of fishing for a certain period of time, oftentimes with NRDA, they'll come up with how many docks can we add to that body of water that will increase the volume of fishermen that will come from this point forward. I think that's a bit of a letdown if we're talking about trying to use the one legal authority we have to make the Gulf a better place as a result of this disaster. But that's what the cookbook says. That's what it is now. And so, you know, I think this is the importance, I think, as David alluded to, of getting into the process now, either forcefully by litigation or politically pulling a lever and making your voice be heard. In Louisiana, for example, the Louisiana Oil Spill Commission is the entity that's responsible for quantifying that loss of use. They're the ones who are going to evaluate during this injury assessment phase what they think the lost use in Louisiana was as a result of the oil spill. Your loss as a commercial fisherman, as a hunter, as a recreational fisherman, as a community. And they may or may not have the expertise in-house to really accurately do that. And so it's all the more essential then that outside experts might be involved in that process. But not only to assess the injury, but then to come up with projects or programs that might truly make us whole and maybe even better. And I think that's where outside third-party talent and creativity is essential. But currently the process isn't open to that. Perfunctory public participation, as it's written in the playbook now, allows you to get a look at the preliminary injury assessments, the injury assessments, the restoration plan that they come up with, their proposed projects. It allows you to have notice and comment, but essentially that's it. And so I think, you know, with all the talent and expertise that I come across every day in sessions like this, I think there's a need for a place at the table to really kind of meaningfully get in and create some of these project ideas. I think as a lawyer, I try not to venture too far from what I have immediately in front of me. The one legal authority we have is NRDA. And as we work to make this MABUS plan be something real, as we work to try to divert penalties to coastal restoration, right in front of us is this legal process that I think is gray enough in its rules that if we get in under there, we can make it a vehicle for a better day in the Gulf. So I recommend now's the time, and I recommend get to know your trustees a lot better than we may have up to this point. Start selling this idea of NRDA to the public in a broader, more sexy way. Strip it out the acronym for starters, and start talking in real terms to people. But I think this is a really important moment because all the more with the notice to proceed, this is the process now at the beginning. And for better or for worse, those trustees are already starting to define how big or narrow that injury that they're going to ultimately try to compensate for will be. And so you want to make sure that that injury embraces as many of our needs as possible, and then down the road that the projects that they come up with are truly more than just getting us back to the day before. Any questions?
How do you find out who are the trustees in these various organizations? Like who is on the Louisiana Oil Spill?
Every state, the governor gets to appoint their trustees, and so.
So how do you find out?
You can go the unified site for all things NRDA is through NOAA. It's darrp.noaa.gov, and they have all the states, and then there's links to each other. In Louisiana, it's the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, and then they have on their site now more and more information about what they're doing in terms of their NRDA response. Well, I think, you know, first of all, because of that, politically speaking, I don't think there's any taste at all for litigation. I mean, I think every one of your trustees is looking to try to get in and out of this. I would think in Louisiana, you do not have, you do not have a meaningful ramping up of your litigation on it. You know, there's two parallel NRDA teams in Louisiana, for example. One that's been organized by CPRA and one that's being organized by the Attorney General's office. And a good canary in the mine is to the extent to which they're actually interacting or not. And so I think I think we should assume that there is not a desire to stretch this out for a long period of time with litigation. I mean, to David's point, how the federal government, I think, is acting already is a good indication of that. So, and moreover, Louisiana coming out with $6 billion in project ideas right now under the emergency banner. I think these are all things that we should say, this is something that may ultimately take a long time, but I think the drivers of it are going to try to make it go pretty quick. And so I don't think, though, there's any quick fix as an alternative to this. I think NRDA is your pathway. I think even the Mavis plan, when you look at it, it yet still requires the creation of law and then regulations and a governing body. All that stuff can take almost as long as a NRDA process on a short end non-litigation could take.
So how do you do this without having, as Janelle said before, you've got not just Alaska and the tribes within one state, you've got all these different states. How do you do this so that it's fairly, so that it's equitable across from Texas to Florida, so that it's not just, you know, one of the concerns about Hurricane Katrina is that New Orleans got all the attention, and so Mississippi less so, and then by the Battery, Alabama was virtually ignored. So how do you do it so that the whole Gulf is able to be restored as one body rather than states fighting?
I think we've never been here before. You know, and I think I think in good faith working. I mean, I've been to CPR meetings where they've described their very regular meetings with their fellow state trustees. I think it's all easy issues, relatively speaking, at this point. When you get to money, it becomes another issue. I mean, there's certainly the formalistic litigation route. You can just take your ball and go and sue BP directly. I think well before that, though, there's going to be a lot of working behind the scenes to try to come up with projects that makes everybody feel like they're a winner. I think all the states are starting to realize that they can't act alone. I mean, another canary in the mine, I think, outside of NRDA is that Louisiana, having gone to BP to ask for $75 million in marketing money for seafood safety and not getting very far, is now reaching out to Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida to come up with a unified campaign to go to BP all at once. I think that's an indication of where they're going to have to go, even with NRDA. It may water things down. I mean, and that's where I think that private sector pressure is going to be important, because the political entities are always looking for a victory, and that may not be what you consider to be a victory.